all of us are at different stages of life, but for many, this week was a week of transition here this time of year. School started, at least for my kids, on Friday, and I got the same answer that I knew I was going to get. I asked my kids after the first day of school, so how was school today? I kid you not, all of them said the same thing. Boring, right? That was their answer. Why? Because all we had to do was sit and listen to instructions and protocols and ways in which we have to operate. It's really true, though. If you were to start at a new job, you were to join a new organization or a new time of year or whatever, there's always that sense where there are expectations for everyone's success, which are made clear at the outset. If you don't, well, what happens when we're not clear on what success is in a group of people? What happens if policies, procedures, and shared values and understandings, what happens when they're not clear? We all have horror stories in our lives of conflict and other such things. So imagine a story. This has never happened to me, but I imagine how I would respond if I did. Your company hires a new employee. One day, you go to the break room and you always pack your lunch and put it in the refrigerator to eat your lunch. You happen to have a meeting that day, and your meeting goes long, right? And so you get to the break room a little bit after everybody else. You go to the refrigerator, and when you open up the refrigerator, you open up your lunchbox. Your lunch has been eaten. And you inquire, and you're like, what happened here? I left it full of my lunch, and now it is all eaten. And then they say, oh, it was the new employee. And you approach the new employee and say, hey, why did you eat my lunch? And the employee says, well, at my last job, we all shared lunch together, and it was sort of open season on lunch. So what happens if your company doesn't have a clear policy on something like this? I'll tell you what happens. Mutiny happens, right? We all need guidelines for how to succeed together, because when we don't have these guidelines, bad things happen. People assume wrong things about each other. We hurt each other. People have so many distractions that our work never seems to get done. Morale seems to tank. Those are all silly examples, but we understand them to be true. And if you've been with us the last few weeks, you know that we've been looking at Jesus. And today we're going to zero in on a section in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus gave guidelines for his followers, where he is really clear. Guys, listen, we must be clear on this. This is how we're going to change the world. Guys, listen, this is real life. If you want real life, this is how you get it. Guys, follow me. Now, you have a handout on your seat there in front of you, and if you want to follow along, there's a few blanks there, and here's your first one there at the top. We've been saying this frequently enough, you should be able to start saying it, that we've said the last few weeks, that a disciple is someone who makes the most important thing in life to be like Jesus. That's plain and simple. It may be a little bit more complicated, but that's in its simple form. A disciple is someone who makes the most important thing in life to be like Jesus. Well, if you were with us last week, you know that we looked in chapter 8 of the Gospel of Mark, and we looked at how Jesus came to offer us real life. You want real life? Well, this is how to have it. But what many of us have, what many people who claim the name of Jesus in our society, we don't have real life. And the honest reason why, as we'll unpack it even further, the reason we don't have real life, even though we claim the name of Jesus, is because we've cherry-picked some things that we like about Christianity, that we like about Jesus, that we like about the Bible. And in some ways, if we're really honest, we've mashed some things that we like about that, and we have mashed them with some things that we like about being Americans in our culture. Now, what Jesus is going to tell us this morning, it's important that we say what he is going to instruct is for those who claim the name of Jesus, who claim to follow him. This is not for those who don't claim to follow him. Well, we've been in a series this summer called Trial and Error, where we have been looking at those who have followed Jesus, his closest followers, and we've looked at stories of failures, which we'll look at again today, and some unlikely successes. And Last week, we looked at the 12 closest followers of Jesus and how they were miserable failures. They will be successful and they will get it later, but not in the Gospels. Mark gives us a remarkable picture of Jesus and his disciples right in the middle of his Gospels, chapters 8 through 10. Mark is constructing this middle section very deliberately when Jesus is having this conversation with his followers. Guys, this is how we're going to change the world. This is how I want to give you real life. And it's smashed into a section, 3 chapters, where Jesus predicts his death, where the disciples are very obtuse and don't get it, and Jesus then has to teach them very countercultural ideas about how to have real life. But we're also going to look this morning really briefly, bookending on both sides of those 3 predictions in chapters 8, 9, and 10, Mark includes 2 healing stories. So chapter 8, verses 22 through 26, Jesus is in Bethsaida. And there's a healing story, and it's a fascinating healing story. It's actually very unique in the Gospels. Jesus does something that he does rarely. He spat in a man's eyes who was blind, and the man could then, Jesus asked him, after Jesus puts his hands on him, Jesus says, "Do you see anything?" to the man. And the man says, "I see people." But what's interesting is he says, "They look like trees walking around," which is kind of strange. It's a little weird. You have to ask this question, like, could Jesus somehow only do a partial healing? It wasn't full and complete, and perhaps Jesus didn't get it right the first time. But Jesus puts his hands on the man again, Mark tells us, and his sight was restored, and he could then see clearly. That is at the front end of these 3 places where Jesus predicts his death. The disciples don't get it, and then he teaches them. By itself, this story is really random and strange. But at the end of this section, Mark includes the story of another healing, and now this time he's in Jericho with a man named Bartimaeus. And this is what's fascinating. Notice the difference in the language of the conversation with Jesus. Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus says, "Rabbi, I want to see." Jesus says, "Go, your faith has healed you." Immediately, we are told the man received his sight, and then he followed Jesus. Mark is trying to tell us through historical healing stories of the disciples' spiritual blindness. They didn't get it at first. He predicts his death, teaches them 3 times, and he says, "Follow me. This is what it means to see." So, Mark wants us, in the middle of these 3 passages and these prediction passages, he wants us to evaluate our own spiritual eyesight as we hear the prediction passages and the teachings of Jesus. The disciples are like the first guy. They didn't see clearly. But when we understand clearly, as Bartimaeus says, we not only see, but then we follow Jesus and do what he says. So I ask you, do you want to see, and do you want to have real life as Jesus offers? Well, last week, if you were with us, you know we looked at the first prediction passage in chapter 8. Jesus had predicted his death. If you were with us, you saw Peter rebukes Jesus and says, "No, you're not going to die. You're our king. You're going to rule and reign." Jesus then rebukes Peter, and he says, "Peter, get behind me, Satan. You don't have in mind the things of God. You have the concerns of man." Jesus then said these things that we unpacked last week. He said these things. He says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me," Jesus said. He goes on to say, "Whoever wants to save their life must lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and the gospel will save it." Jesus said, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul?" And Jesus said, "If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, I will be ashamed of them when I come again in all my Father's glory." Those are hard sayings. And Jesus isn't done yet. Today we're going to look at the second and the third prediction passages here this morning. I invite you to open your Bible, grab the one in the seat in front of you, or read the words on the screen. We're going to start in Mark chapter 9, verse 30 of the second prediction passage of Jesus here this morning. Mark chapter 9, beginning in verse 30, here's what we read. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man himself is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. Not surprising, but they, the disciples, did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Jesus said, I'm going to die. And the disciples are thinking, what kind of king goes and dies? You're useless when you're dead. We want a winner, Jesus. We want someone who's going to take us across the finish line. Verse 33, they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? Oh boy. But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. Verse 36, Jesus took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. The disciples, let's be honest, in our particular parlance, they're acting like they're in the middle school locker room as they're talking to each other, beating their own chest, putting each other down, telling each other how much better they are than one another. Those of you who have ever been in such a locker room, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Puffing our own chests at one another. Jesus, though, after telling his disciples that he's going to die, they still don't understand. So he takes time to teach them again. Why? The instinct to serve other people should increase over time for disciples. You want to know what makes a disciple? The defining mark in their life should be their posture to serve. That's what Jesus is clearly telling us. If you want to be first in life, learn to put others first. If you want real life, Jesus says, make it a priority for others to gain at your expense. You see, to give other people is simply your leftovers. I've got mine for me, I'll give others what's left. That's not the way of Jesus. To expect others to always return the favor is not the way of Jesus. To simply put others first, that's the Jesus way. And then Jesus, as we just read, took one of the most obvious, underprivileged, overlooked groups in all of the society in which he lived in the first century Roman world. He did what other people would not. It was astounding that the rabbi would wrap his arms around a little child. In that day, he told his followers to welcome little children. And in that day, children were to be seen and not heard. Children were to be pushed aside. Wait your turn. They were the most neglected, along with slaves and servants in that day and age. Jesus brings the most unlikely people front and center. He says, welcome them. And if disciples should serve even the lowest in society, then they should also serve everyone in society, because all of us are dearly loved image bearers of God. But then we get to verse 42, and it takes a different, strange kind of turn. Mark carefully is building to this, and he's going to get in our face a little bit. You see, if you want real life, at least according to Jesus, Mark wants us to know, and he's going to show us here really quickly, you don't have a private life and a public life. You don't have a Christian part of your life in a non-Christian part of your life. Let's put it even differently. There is no such thing as the Sunday morning you and the Monday morning you. There is no such thing, according to Jesus. You serve others and you have real life, or you pretend when people are watching. And if you're just a pretender, you never get real life. That's what he's trying to tell us. So we read in verse 42. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, that is, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. In other words, if they died a really awful, painful death. Now, the translation might be suggesting that Jesus is referring to children, but he's not. The original Greek there is actually suggesting he's talking about other disciples who are newer in their faith. He's helping us realize this is where our American culture presses up against Jesus. And he pushes us disciples to be different than the world around us, and different even than other Christians around us. And here's where he presses in. He is reminding his disciples, part of your discipleship journey is that you have a responsibility to other people. You have a responsibility particular to those younger in their faith. Jesus is going to use hyperbole to make his point. And remember that in hyperbole doesn't mean it's not true. Hyperbole simply means that to make the point, we must take it seriously, even when exaggeration is used. So what do you think Jesus is trying to say? That it would be better if a large millstone were hung around your neck and thrown into the sea than to cause someone weaker in their faith to stumble. What do you think he means? Well, he's not done yet. Verse 43 and following, Jesus says these words to his disciples. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands to go into hell where the fire never goes out. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. You get the idea what he's trying to say. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell. Where? Now he's going to make an allusion to Isaiah 66, verse 24. He says, where? That place where the worms that eat them do not die and the fire is not quenched. So Jesus clearly wants us to understand something important. It's easy to write it off and go, he's just exaggerating for the sake of effect. He doesn't really mean for us to take it seriously. Or does he? And when we often read these words, it's easy for us to fixate on his conversation about hell and who goes there and entirely miss the point that he's trying to make for us. Let me ask this question. These are the words of Jesus. How far are you willing to go to help other people grow in their faith? How much are you willing to give up so that other people may grow in their faith and your actions not cause them to stumble? What will you give up so that other people may know Jesus? When others complain about the cost of following Jesus, those who get this real life Jesus offers are those who care less about the cost because the benefit is so great. And so what's a little bit of our money to give to invest in God's kingdom? What is it? What is a bit of our time and our mental energy investing in people far away from God so that they may grow in their faith? And let's be honest, the hardest people are those that are just a little bit more high maintenance sometimes, right? High maintenance people were like, no thanks, that's not my problem. And what is it? What if God is calling you to give your time and your energy so that they may grow in their faith, so that they may come closer to Jesus? Jesus makes it really clear. What are you willing to give up? Because the gain is so much greater than what you could ever sacrifice. That is so un-American, isn't it? We see in our culture, everything is about me, and you take care of you, I'll take care of me. Don't cross over into my space. And Jesus says, that's not my way. Jesus is telling his disciples that when you understand what he really offers you, you will gladly give up anything that prevents other people from finding hope and healing in him. There is no cost too great for others to gain, to grow closer to Jesus. That's what he's trying to tell us. So if you're a follower of Jesus, Jesus reminds us that you're not on a private journey with Jesus. You are responsible to other people, and you have influence on other people's faith journeys. And the joy of helping others grow in Jesus surpasses any treasure this world offers. I heard a story this week that somebody told me. Recently, the person had told me having a conflict with a family member, and in the part of the conflict that was just this ongoing conflict with this family member, in the middle of all this mess and all of the lack of communication, this person's trying to follow Jesus. The family member is not trying to follow Jesus, and there's a lot of messiness involved and a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. Most of us know what that's like. And in the middle of the conversation, the person tells me that they had loaned a large sum of money, a large sum for the person, to this family member, and the family member got mad every time the person brought it up and got defensive and all this, and the conversation went really south really quickly and causing a lot of pain. And I said to the person a few weeks ago, I said, the person in your family needs Jesus, right? Yeah. God has always provided for you, right? Yeah? Where are you going with this? What if you chose to forgive the debt and not bring it up ever again? Would you do it? Person moved on in the conversation. I thought, that didn't go like I thought. Conversation this week. Person says, well, chose to forgive the debt. Really, how'd it go? I'm going, oh boy, this goes bad. Probably can't pay the mortgage, can't pay the rent, can't pay for groceries. It's going to go really badly, really quickly. It's going fine. I'm not bringing it up. We're talking. My family member needs Jesus. Here we go. Let's go, Jesus. Let's get on with helping her find hope and healing in Jesus. And I tell you that story to remind us he never said it was easy. He never said it wouldn't cost you something. What he did say is that when we trust him and we put the needs of other people first and we put their faith journey in front of what we perceive is our need, we have real life. That's what Jesus is telling us. So, in your handout, your fill in there, Jesus in this second encounter in chapter 9 reveals that real life comes from positively influencing others in their faith journeys, while warning us of consequences from negatively influencing others in their faith journeys. Now, whether Jesus intends for us to literally cut off our hands or our feet or pluck out our eyes, honestly misses the point. That's not what he's trying to suggest. What he is saying is we need to get serious about the fact that there's no greater joy than giving up things that do not last for others for the sake of souls that do last forever. What will you give up for the sake of the soul of people who need Jesus? who are weaker in their faith. What will you give up for them? Jesus says, whatever you give up, you will not regret it. He told his disciples he's going to die so that they could live. And he tells his disciples, you and me, that we should give up even our body parts so that others may grow in their faith. But the disciples, they still don't understand. They're slow. Peter's rebuking Jesus. The disciples are puffing up their chests, claiming greatness. Jesus now repeats himself a third time. Turn over to chapter 10, beginning in verse 32. We read these words, for the third prediction, passage, and teaching of Jesus. They were on their way to Jerusalem, we read, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. We're going to go up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. Now, what do you think the disciples are thinking when they hear this the third time? Well, if they're like me sometimes, they conveniently ignored it, right? Because they didn't want to hear what he had to say. Did your kids ever do that? They didn't want to hear it. So they promptly ignored it. Because they knew what they were going to get out of Jesus. They knew what they wanted. They knew Jesus was going to help them get it. In that first century culture where the Jews lived in the Roman world, they wanted power. They wanted revenge. They wanted to stop being controlled by Rome. They wanted relief from all the pain and suffering. They wanted God to do good things in the world around them, yes. But they knew Jesus was supposed to crush their opponents and give them what they wanted. That's what they had their minds set on. Verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we want. Now, if you go earlier in chapter 3, verse 17 of Mark, when Jesus was appointing his 12, these two guys were called sons of thunder. Where'd they get that nickname? Well, over in Luke chapter 9, beginning in verse 51, Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem. He sends some messengers to Samaria, which was on the way. They go to Samaria. They ask him to set up. Jesus is coming. They reject him and say, get out of here. We don't want you here. James and John hear about this, about how those messengers were treated. And they look at Jesus and they turn to him and they say, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to smite them all? Sons of thunder. My kind of guys. And they said, Jesus, we want you to do for us whatever we want. Jesus, verse 36 says, what do you want me to do for you? Isn't it amazing? Can you imagine to see Jesus so kind and patient and loving and gracious? He's so long-suffering with us, isn't he? Well, guys, what would you like me to do for you? Verse 37, they replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. In other words, Jesus had said he was going to die 3 times. The disciples are to deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow Jesus. He said to them, in order to be first, you must be the last. And now these guys are saying, we want the places of recognition. Jesus, we know that you're king, but what we want is to be able to have seats number 2 and 3, respectively. Thank you. Because they're still thinking that real life comes from getting all of my needs met and getting what I want, and in ruling over other people, having advantages for myself, getting all of the glory. Jesus, on the other hand, he's now going to say the same thing, only differently for the third time. Verse 38 and following, you don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? And they had the audacity to say, we can. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. You just don't know it yet. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. And he's saying to them, you guys want glory for all the wrong reasons. You want power and authority for your own gain. You don't want it for the good of other people. Jesus tells them that the path to glory is through self-sacrifice. It is in giving up yourself so that others may gain that you have real life. That's what Jesus tells them. And he foretells that they will understand later, but not yet. He's saying this, guys, listen, and he says it to us too. You want the heavenly chorus to sing your praises? You want the crown of glory in heaven someday? You know how you get that? It's going to come the same way that it comes to Jesus. Through giving up your life. Verse 41. When the 10 heard about this conversation with James and John, the sons of thunder, they became indignant with James and John. So clearly James and John were not the only two with an ego in this inner circle as Jesus is having this conversation. They're mad because James and John beat them to the punch. Whoa, guys. No. You're not number 2 and number 3. I am clearly number 2. No. And they're arguing and they're mad. So they're all lumped into this group that wants all the glory, and they don't want it by means of the way that Jesus tells them that they are going to get it. Verses 42 through 44, now Jesus is going to teach them yet again. He says, we read in verse 42, Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Do we not see this every day in our lives? People with power cling to power, and they lord it over all of the peons beneath them. We see it every day, don't we? And it's not new. Jesus is like, yep, we know how they do it. That's how the world does it. They take power so that they can put their thumbs down on people below them so they have more power, and they keep their distance from those below them, and they exploit those below them so that they can gain more. Does this sound familiar in our world? Absolutely. And Jesus is like, yep, that's how the world does it. We go on, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Verse 43. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. I think Jesus says these words that his bride, the church, desperately needs to hear today. The disciples needed to hear, we need to hear that the way of Jesus is not to make people do what is against their will. That is not the way of Jesus. Slave masters force other people to do what they want against their will. Slaves cannot make anyone do anything. And Jesus reminds us of this. So let me be practical to our culture today. Jesus might say to us, you have heard it said by influential voices that we must take our culture back. Take it back by force if necessary. And Jesus looks us in the eye today and he says, not so with you. That's not how we do it. You've heard it said, perhaps, that we need to pass laws that agree with the Bible to make people moral. Not so with you. Slaves cannot operate that way. You've heard it said, we need to argue to change people's minds. Not so with you. You've heard it said, we need to hate the sin and love the sinner. I'll be honest, I still don't know what that means. Because when we use that phrase, hate the sin, love the sinner, we have a particular sin in mind that we clearly hate more than our own sin. And we say these kinds of things like we're going to take it back, like we're going to win influence by forcing people to do what they don't clearly want to do. The way of Jesus is to see ourselves as servants, to see ourselves as slaves, as those who the only thing we have to offer a dying world, we only have our love, we only have our service to them, and we only have dependence on the Spirit of God to change hearts. We have nothing else to change the world. And why is that so difficult for us to put into practice? Why is that so difficult to understand? That's the way of Jesus. Why is that so different than what we see and hear from many Christian voices today? I think part of it is because we want to know that things will turn out okay. We want to know that things will turn out okay. And so we grab in our arsenal the one way we know works: force, power. That works. Let's do that. And Jesus is like, disciples, I've already told you how this story ends. Do it my way, not the way of the world you see around you. Jesus could have come to earth as a politician, and he could have gotten things done that way. Jesus could have come as a warrior, and he could have made all of the enemies surrender. Instead, Jesus came as a servant, as a slave. One last time, he's going to tell his disciples, I have come as a slave. Because you cannot find real life using Satan's tactics of using power to get what you want. It will never work. You can only find real life by serving others. And Jesus is going to tell them one more time, the only way to real life, guys, is through serving others. To give up so others may gain. And what Jesus is going to tell them one more time is this: and I'm going to show you how. Verse 45, Jesus says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus gave up his life so we can be forgiven of our sins, so that we can have real life and a relationship with him. And he says, and when you do what I've done, you will change the world too. The Jesus way is different from what many Christians and even churches today think, but the Jesus way is still the only way to real life. So your last fill in, Jesus reveals that real life comes from stewarding power for the good of others, not wielding power for personal gain. Real life and the American way are often at odds. And I wonder, do you know the difference? Jesus said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Jesus said, if you want to be first, you must choose to be last. Jesus said, if your eye causes you to stumble and causes someone else to stumble, pluck it out. He said, if you want to have real life, you must be a servant. Real life comes from trusting Jesus and imitating Jesus. That's the only way we will find it. It's the only way we will change the world. The message of Jesus still remains. And before Jesus predicted and taught his disciples, he told a story of a blind man. He spit in his eyes and he touched him. And the man said, I can see, but people look like trees. They couldn't see clearly yet. After Jesus gives these 3 predictions of his death and teachings of his disciples, he goes and blind Bartimaeus, He asks him, what do you want me to do? I want to see. Jesus touches him. Bartimaeus is able to see, and Bartimaeus follows Jesus. Which of those two blind men is you? Because when you see Jesus clearly and follow him, your life looks really different than the people around you. Your life is marked by giving up so that others may gain.